Hi everyone, this is Mr. Cockcroft, and today I'm going to do a brief review video on this theme questions assignment we did in class together. I'm going to go ahead, if you can on your end, bring these questions up so you can follow along, that would be perfect. So I have this already up, and this is what it looks like. There are only 3 questions that we did in class, and so simply we're going to go over and discuss why each of these quotes fits with the theme statement for the question. Okay, so number 1 says, which quote from the text supports the theme statement, people can act in cruel and unacceptable ways when they refuse to accept the differences of others? Now, remember, there's 3 steps we want to take when figuring out theme and figuring out or applying the theme statement to a story. We want to know the topic, we want to know how the topic relates to the theme statement, which it's given to us, and then we want to figure out what supporting evidence best fits to support the theme statement. So right here, already in front of us, one of these quotes is the correct quote, and we're given the theme statement. So the third part that's missing is to try to figure out what topics is this theme statement about. And so if we remember from All Summer in a Day, the story we read last few days, we can start brainstorming some of the topics from that story. And just reading this quote, let's try to figure out some of the important words that really stick out from this theme statement. So people can act in cruel, I think that's a key word, cruel and unacceptable ways when they refuse to accept the differences of others. And I think differences is a key word there as well. So I think maybe one topic we might look for is maybe cruelty or maybe differences of others. Those are 2 pretty big topics that definitely relate to the story we read. Now, one more thing I want to look at is what is kind of the overall feeling of this theme statement? Is this a positive statement or is this kind of a negative statement? Again, looking at those key words, cruel, unacceptable, refuse even is kind of a negative word. Refusing to accept the differences of others. This is definitely a negative theme. This is not a good, uplifting, positive statement. So that's another important takeaway to keep in mind, because we're going to start reading some of these quotes and we want to apply the quote to the theme. So if the quote has nothing to do with cruelty or these negative feelings, then we should probably understand that's not the right answer. So let's look at answer choice A. The children pressed to each other like so many roses, so many weeds, intermixed, peering out for a look at the hidden sun. Now that quote really doesn't have anything to do with cruelty or being unacceptable. It's simply talking about kids trying to look out a window at the sun. So I don't think this quote can be applied to this theme statement. Let's move on again. B, but when they were running and turning their faces up to the sky and feeling the sun on their cheeks like a warm iron, they were taking off their jackets and letting the sun burn their arms. Same thing. There's nothing negative about that. This is a very positive statement, actually. Going outside, feeling the sun, taking off the jackets. And again, if you think about the context of the story, we know this was a really positive experience for all those kids to finally meet the sun. Option C, then they closed the door and heard the gigantic sound of the rain falling in tons and avalanches everywhere and forever. Now, we might know, again, knowing the context, we know this is definitely not a positive statement. The rain is kind of this sense of dread, and it's just this kind of common thread that all these children face day to day is this rain on top of them every single day. So it's not positive, but again, we're looking for these big words like cruelty. There's not really anything cruel about what's happening with the rain. It also isn't really talking about people. This isn't people acting or having any interaction with people. This is all about nature and about the rain. So that leaves us with D. And so D says they hated her pale snow face, her waiting silence, her thinness, and her possible future. Already there's a very big key word right here, hated. That definitely fits in with the other words like cruelty and refusal to accept differences. And even reading with the rest, how the kids did not like her possible future where she was possibly leaving Earth. Margot was different from the rest of the class, which kind of led to their refusal to accept her and really ultimately bully her. All right, so let's scroll down and look at number 2. So D is our correct answer for number 1. Number 2 says, how does the author use the setting to convey the theme statement? Nature rules the human existence with an iron fist. All right, so let's use that same process we just used for number 1. We have our theme, we have our list of quotes. So now let's figure out a topic. Let's pick out the key words. Nature rules the human existence with an iron fist. So human existence, and here's some figurative language here. Does nature actually have an iron fist? No. But maybe you've heard that phrase before, thinking maybe about like rulers or like government leaders who rule, or kings that rule with an iron fist. That's really just talking about strength and power. So nature rules the human existence with a great power is what they're trying to say, if you don't know that figurative language there. But I'm going to give you a trick here that kind of shows that this is actually a pretty easy quote to understand, or easy theme to understand and apply the quote. Let's focus on nature. If we just, again, our quote has to be applied to the theme. So our quote has to talk about nature and talk about how nature is kind of this powerful, natural experience over people, okay? So I'm going to look at these quotes, and let's start with A again. They turned on themselves like a feverish wheel, all tumbling spokes. Again, does that have anything to do with nature? Well, no. It has nothing to do with really, it's again talking about the children and how they kind of are kind of a little crazy when they're trying to see outside and see through the window. B, they closed the door and heard the gigantic sound of the rain falling in tons and avalanches everywhere and forever. Now, again, knowing the context, we know that rain is this very powerful element that is affecting everyone on Venus in the story. So this does have nature in it, and it does talk about how it's gigantic sound falling in tons and avalanches. This can be applied with how nature is ruling all of the kids on Venus with this kind of powerful iron fist. Just to make sure, C, well, don't wait around here, cried the boy savagely. You won't see nothing. Again, no nature. It's just one quick quote from the boy making fun of Margot. And then finally, D, they could not meet each other's glances. Their faces were solemn and pale. They looked at their hands and feet, their faces down. Margot. Again, nothing about nature, nothing about the rain, nothing about the sun coming out even. So we really have one choice that fits for this question, and that is choice B. Our final question is question 3. Let's read it together. Crowd mentality can pull people along in its wake, leaving some to regret their behavior after all is said and done. Which lines from the text best support this statement? So this is a mouthful. I can definitely understand. This is probably the hardest question we've seen so far. Let's try to take it slow, break down the question, and that can help you reveal bits and pieces of the answer to kind of have this big aha moment in the end. Let's start at the beginning. Crowd mentality. This is really referring to, maybe you've had this experience when your entire group of friends is doing something, and maybe you or maybe someone else in the group doesn't really want to go along with it, but you do anyway because you have this kind of crowd herd mentality where you're just going to follow along with what the group does. Now, this is a great example that happens in All Summer Today because, there is the crowd of students and crowd of kids that are very rude to Margot. But really think about it. Maybe there were individuals in that crowd that, they were just kind of following along. Maybe they didn't actually hate Margot, but because the crowd was doing it, they decided to do it as well. So what they're saying is crowd mentality can pull people along in its wake. So it can kind of carry all these people into this one group, leaving some to regret their behavior after all is said and done. Let's highlight that word. That's a really key word, regret, because that's a feeling. So remember, these theme statements usually have to deal with what the author wants you to feel and the message behind their story. So leaving some to regret their behavior after all is said and done. So again, key word, the big group, the big overall group, and then having some regret for what they have done. Now let's do a little trick. Here's a little tip that's a good little test-taking tool that you can use, especially when you're close reading a question. So crowd mentality, we talked about how it's a big group thing. Well, if we're looking at the quotes, these quotes have very specific pronouns that are in common with each other. I'm looking specifically at B, C, and D. They all have the word they. But they were running and turning their faces. They hated her pale face. They looked at their hands and feet. They could not meet each other's glances. Lots and lots of they. Now, what that is, what a pronoun is he, she, they, it's describing a person. All of these talk about a group. They indicates that there's multiple people. It is a group. So immediately, just seeing that word they would make us think, okay, this does relate to a crowd mentality because it's multiple people. Does that make sense? So A, this is the one difference though. Well, don't wait around here, cried the boy savagely. You won't see nothing. The boy, you, that is all pretty singular and doesn't necessarily relate to the crowd mentality of a big group. Again, that's kind of a little trick and using a little bit of grammar to help you out. So immediately after seeing that, I can maybe say, okay, maybe A has nothing to do with the big group and what they're thinking. So we've already taken out one answer choice, so we're left with B, C, and D. B says they could not meet each other's glances. Their faces were solemn and pale. They looked at their hands and feet, their faces down, Margot. We're going to come back to this. Very key word here is the word solemn. Solemn means kind of serious, maybe grave. Grave situations happened. Their faces were solemn and pale. They looked down at their hands. And again, using the context of the story, we know that just a sentence before this quote is when it kind of the big reveal happens, when the rain starts pouring again and the kids realize that they left Margot in the closet. And then we get this quote, and there's that big word, solemn, pale, and we just kind of realize through implicit evidence that they messed up. They feel guilty. They feel remorseful. And then ultimately, going back to our theme, they are regretful of their actions. But just to double check, C, they hated her pale snow face, her waiting silence, her thinness, and her possible future. We have used this quote before, but again, this doesn't really relate to them regretting how they've treated Margot. This kind of goes right back. Oops, sorry, let me undo that real quick. This goes back to the fact that in the beginning, they really did not like her. They hated Margot, which is a very strong word. Again, we use that strong language. But this doesn't actually relate to the theme because there is no remorse. There is no regret for all the behavior that they've done to Margot. So C is not the right answer. And then finally D, but they were running and turning their faces up to the sky and feeling the sun on their cheeks like a warm iron. They were taking off their jackets and letting the sun burn their arms. Once again, we have a group, crowd mentality. Remember, all the kids are outside running, happy. They're in the sun. It's a great time. But again, they're not regretting that. They love that. They love being out there. They're not, in that moment, they're not regretting the behavior they did to Margot. They're just simply thinking, hey, it's warm out here. This is amazing. So ultimately, the correct answer for number 3 is B. So with number 3, hopefully we can remember those 2 tips. Using the grammar to really figure out the pronouns and figure out, and being able to just completely delete one answer is very helpful when taking a test. And secondly, with this example, using context, go back into the text and read around the quote so we really have a good understanding of what's happening in the story. I appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully now we can understand how to apply quotes to an overall theme statement while also using a topic to assist us in that process.